Amidst the battlefield of World War II, Kenyan soldiers are terrified for their lives. Of course, with a ricochet of bullets, anyone would be. However, when they look around themselves, they realize something monumental aside from their fear. The white man that they so greatly feared was falling down, was fearing and running away, just like them.
Hi, my name is Ngina,
And I'm Mehek.
and we are the Disruptors. Welcome to Season 2, The Hanged. Let's take it back.
World War II, 1939 to 1945. Quite the turning point in world history and a turning point in Kenyan history as well. We were in the midst of British colonial history. We were colonized by the white man. And you'd be surprised to know that a lot of our own people fought for the British cause out of fear of an alien invasion. And when I say alien invasion, it wasn't actually an Axis invasion. Germany, Italy, Japan, the feared three by the British, by the entire West, and the propaganda had done pretty well in Kenyan highlands. We're talking about how we came about one of the greatest rebellions that would then lead to the freedom of Kenya. And it all began within World War II. So 1939 is quite the time for the world, right? We have a devastating drought in Kenya. So crop losses have already left an entire population famished and poor. Then we had the Great Depression, which was already sinking the empire to its knees in terms of in terms of the economy. And this actually mandated a lot of people to find themselves joining the military just to earn a living. And then, of course, World War II breaks out. And as you know, the British East Protectorate was surrounded by enemies. We had Germany on one side in Tanzania, we had the Italians somehow trying to find footing in Ethiopia. And the white people came home and said, hey, I know we've colonized you, but the other guys, if they win, they're going to do worse to you. Which, spoiler alert,
Propaganda.
yeah. So here we are, whereby a lot of Kenyans starts to enlist, especially in the in the King's African Rifles. About 2,900 African men actually joined it. But we're going to focus on where Kenyan men found themselves, especially in two very key campaigns across the world. So Kenyan soldiers would find themselves amongst the others from the continent in Burma, which Gina will give us a little bit more insight on later. Where they were in India, they were in Israel, and crucially, they were also in Ethiopia. So while the British took them out to all these other places, they took them to neighboring Ethiopia, telling them that if we let the Italian fascists win, they're probably going to hunt you down, which, of course, I mean, would have been the case regardless, but it happened. And so, what happened? The threat of this Axis invasion is actually what propelled a lot of young men in the 1940s to join the British cause and fight for them very gallantly, especially. However, things would look not so great when they were shipped off.
Yeah. So when they got to Burma, which is now known as Myanmar, they go there in 1942. And the main reason they're taken there basically is they were seen as able to fight in harsh conditions. We've had this quite a lot. um, and so the idea was that they were able to fight in the harsh conditions, were like the monsoon winds. They were able to fight. They were able to survive the tropical diseases like malaria, name them. But when they got there, um, there was still a lot of discrimination. Remember, skin of the color does not change when they go to fight. Does not change when they're in this when they're in the army,
Hmm.
basically. And so they face a lot of discrimination. And one thing that's actually pointed out a lot is that there was racial discrimination, obviously, even if the white people who had lower ranks than them, they would still face it. And Kagia actually talks of
Yes.
this while in
So,
the army.
mhm,
Another thing they face is corporal punishment. Imagine you have enlisted for the army, you're going to fight for your country, and while there, you're still receiving corporal punishment.
it's like it never ends.
It never ends. It's the cycle never ends. But interestingly, is that when they're out there, the things they pick up because then this land, quote unquote, exposure.
Hmm.
And so three things they pick are the art of combat, military strategy, and the guerrilla warfare, basically, which we'll get into it once they come back to Kenya. But please get into Kagia a bit.
Definitely.
Yeah.
So when we look at some of the accounts of previous people who had actually enlisted, I'll give you two. First off, Osabi Bildat Kagia, a huge Mau Mau veteran, Kapenguria 6, of someone we don't talk about enough, to be honest. He actually never, he was actually at a secretarial kind of position, and he was enlisted to go work in Egypt, in Ismailia at the time. And that was around the 1940s. And when he was there, he was probably one of the few Africans in that post. It was very unheard of an African being in that kind of post. However, Europeans who were lower ranking than him would often discriminate him, would often sneer at him, and basically just not give him the time of the day. And Kage realized that despite the fact that he's working so hard, his skin color still shone through. It was what he was judged by, not by his merit. And then he would come on to realize later, at a very chance encounter, he met an African American corporal. And this kind of turns the wheels in his mind that, um, yes, there's discrimination, there's racism. However, he has seen that there is someone who looks like him who can get a higher rank. And that kind of laid the seeds of, we can also do better for ourselves, because he has seen someone who looks like him do better, which is probably why representation still matters a lot. And then there's the accounts of Stanley Mathenge, who had actually fought in places like Jerusalem. He was part of the army, and he also faced the same. There was a lot of racial discrimination that he noted, and he saw it also when he came back,
Mm.
right?
Yeah.
So this was something that a lot of those who had enlisted in the 1940s would find themselves facing. So it's key to note that a lot of people enlisted just to get away from the economic hardships. They were hoping for equality. They were hoping for a better life. And they were promised that, actually. They were promised that if you join the military, you will, to some degree, be venerated. You would be, to some degree, compensated. However, all that Kenyan soldiers received was a medal and no homes. Kenyan soldiers returned to a far much more oppressive regime in the
Yeah.
in the mid 1940s. Meanwhile, their white counterparts were being given land, money, everything that they could ask for,
Recognition.
recognition, and it was jarring for
Mm.
the Kenyan soldiers to see that we did the same work as them and we don't receive anything. And they just came back to a life where they found their communities had been completely and utterly torn apart. And this is where a group forms. The Anake of 40 are born. So the Anake of 40 are actually the basis of anti-colonial movement in Kenya, especially the militarized one. And we find that these men are actually a group of men who were circumcised in the 40s, if I'm not wrong,
Yeah.
according to Kikuyu rights.
Yeah.
Um, and they came together to form this group that would first start with communal protests. So when they came back, they realized that their women were being exploited in the sense of forced labor. The British had decided that every single person had to be put to work, that too women. And they were actually making them dig trenches and basically to help them in farming. And of course, no pay, no wage, minimal salaries, probably. And this forced women to leave their homes, however, to also leave their children unattended. And as we all know, that all our cultures are very strongly rooted in family. And this was unacceptable to those who returned. And that was when we find the first protest actually formed by the Anake of 40 in 1947, where they were fighting forced labor. So it was more of a silent protest where they basically passed out information and leaflets and said, hey, don't show up to work. Just don't show up to work. And it
Yeah.
worked.
It actually
Surprisingly, it
works.
worked.
Yeah.
Funny enough, you tell someone nowadays not to show up to work, they'll still show up. But yes, it worked. And that kind of laid the seeds for what happens next, which I'll let
Mm.
Gina get into.
Yeah. So August 1947, women stopped terracing,
Hmm.
which is a win for Anake 40. But now they start moving into other communities and they're giving out oaths.
Hmm.
So just to there was because it was very communal, the oath was meant for number one, secrecy,
Hmm.
it was a vow of secrecy, and it was also a vow of unity in a
Mm-hmm.
sense. Muma wa uigiano wa mwingi.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and they also had a creed which they would read out, and we've had the stories. There was got blood or whatever blood was being
Throwback to season one when apparently Pinto took the oath.
yeah. And they had a mantra, Idhaka Nawiyadi, meaning land and freedom. So basically, these people were fighting for their land and their freedom.
Mm-hmm.
One thing to note is the Anake Afoti, they came back and they were the militarized section of Cow. Yeah. So there was Cow, yes, but the militarized, and it was secret as well. They held their meetings in secret and all these things. So I need to explain something about Mau Mau and
Mm-hmm.
why the name Mau Mau comes
Actually, I
up.
really need you to, because it's a very interesting set of theories that we come
Yeah.
for. And
So the
yes.
origin of the term Mau Mau is very uncertain, but according to some members of the Mau Mau, they never referred to themselves as such. Instead, they preferred the military title Kenya Land and Freedom Army. Some publications, such as the Fred Majalny State of Emergency, the full story of Mau Mau,
Mm-hmm.
claim that it was an anagram of Uma,
Mm-hmm.
which is Kikuyu Kamba for get out,
Mm-hmm.
get out.
Oh,
And
yeah.
so they thought of it as a switch to Mau Mau. And it was a code word. It was a military code word based on a secret language game
Mm-hmm.
Kikuyu boys used to play at the time of their circumcision. Remember, the Anake 40 came about because they had shared customs. They were circumcised around the same time in the 40s. They also bring out there's also an aspect of it being from the Maji Maji rebellion
Mm-hmm.
of the Tanzania
Oh, yes.
people, but so Mau Mau. I don't know why they. I didn't understand that honestly, but as it progresses, as the movement progresses, Mau Mau becomes what we now know as the Swahili version of Mzungu aende Ulaya, Mwafrika apate
Mm-hmm.
uhuru, meaning let the foreigner go back abroad, let the African regain independence.
Mm-hmm.
But there's some things that we need to note. J.M. Kariuki, who was a liaison officer during the Mau Mau and was detained as well,
And
suggests
wrongfully murdered.
yes. uh, uh, suggests that the British preferred to use the term Mau Mau instead of Kenya Land Freedom Army to deny the Mau Mau rebellion international legitimacy, which we'll find out in later episodes that they wanted to paint Mau Mau as a civil war.
Mm-hmm.
Kariuki also wrote that the term Mau Mau was adopted by the rebellion in order to counteract. Okay, so you've called us this, so we're going to embrace the name.
Mm-hmm.
An author and activist, Wangari Maathai, who's one of the people got who went through the airlift program
Yes.
of Tom Mboya, actually has a different story of the origin of the term of the Kikuyu phrase from the for the beginning of a. She says that it's a Kikuyu phrase for the beginning of a list. When beginning a list in Kikuyu, one says Maundo ni Mau.
Mm-hmm.
The main issues are so one, two, three,
Uh-huh.
and so it came to be. So the three things that Mazai talks about is that the Mau Mau were fighting for land, number
Mm-hmm.
one, freedom, number two, and self-governance,
Mm-hmm.
number three. So that's how the name comes to be. So there's from now on we will be referring to them as the Kenya Land Freedom Army
Mm-hmm.
out of respect for their work and the revolution. And so that's how Mau Mau comes
There's
to
also
be.
the there's also a very interesting one where about the Merriam-Webster definition that kind of ties into what the British were trying to paint the Mau Mau as you'll come to notice is mostly when the first time people hear the word Mau Mau, the first image that comes to mind is barbarism, is anarchy, is
Mm.
a lot of violence. And that was actually a very deliberate move on the British part. And that comes through an interesting discovery through a Merriam Webster definition, which Kina will go into because I cannot say those words.
So the term, according to the Merriam-Webster definition, they say the Mau Mau comes from a name of the Mau Mau, a militant African nationalist movement formed among the Kikuyu people of Kenya to advocate violent resistance to British rule. The English term reflects the historical British version of the actions of the Mau Mau, a version that does not acknowledge the grievances of the Kikuyu or the atrocities committed against them. In current English, Mau Mau is used to suggest that a person's efforts and actions stem only from a desire to commit violent acts, or in milder use to cause disruption or achieve some petty aim. When the term is used of a black person, it is especially likely to be considered offensive, which we will see in the episodes to come, that Mau Mau were only seen as people who are violent, disruptive, had no sense when it comes to fighting. They were
Mhm.
just seen as these people who are running around in the forests and
It,
causing chaos.
so it's important to note that the group that came together, Anake 40, and who would later become the Kenya Land and Freedom Army, included a lot of stalwarts whose names we still remember today. As I mentioned, there was Stanley Mathenge. Dedan Kimathi was also part of that original group. There was General China. These are names that will, of course, pop up as we go ahead. But it's
Mm,
important to remember that the seeds of change were basically sowed during World War II, during a time when they realized, number one, the white man is not invincible. Secondly, they're just like us. They have the same reactions just like us. And third, when they realize that despite the fact that we are the same, we're still being treated as lesser. And that despite the fact that we fought for the crown, that we fought for hope, for freedom, for greater independence, it did not come through. And thus, the group went from being the ones who fought for the British crown to being the ones that would end up destroying the influence of the British crown on Kenya and its history. So we come to the end of episode 1. Would like if there's anything that we may have missed out or anything that was lost in translation, please do let us know in the comments below. We'll have links for all our sources included, and we hope to see you guys on this journey of season 2 that we're really excited to bring to you. And we look forward to seeing you guys in season 2, where we'll be talking about now the extremely messy war that breaks out in the countryside amongst Kenyan loyalists, Kenyan freedom fighters, and the British colonialists. Thank you so much, and see you guys next time.